Oh, yeah. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place. Yharnam is the home of blood ministration. You need only unravel its mystery. But where's an outsider like yourself to begin? Easy, with a bit of Yharnam blood of your own. But first, you'll need a contract.
Welcome to a new episode of the Cartridge Club Prime podcast, where we discuss our game of the month with members of the Cartridge Club community. If you've played along, you can always share your own experiences in the forums at cartridgeclub.org or in our community's Discord or across social media using the hashtag PlayAlongWithPrime. I'm Church, and I'll be one of your hosts for this episode of CC Prime. And joining me to talk about our February 2020 game of the month of Bloodborne is Ben Rowland.
Hey, gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And then we also have DispOsedHero.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
And DiskCart.
Hey, yo. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining. Before we jump into the discussion, let's go into the breakdown. Bloodborne is an action role-playing game developed by FromSoftware and published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the PlayStation 4 in March of 2015. Bloodborne follows the player's character, a hunter, through the decrepit, Gothic, Victorian-era-inspired city of Yharnam, whose inhabitants have been afflicted by an abnormal bloodborne disease. Ultimately attempting to find the source of the plague, the player's character unravels the city's intriguing mysteries while fighting beasts. So, I would be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on what exactly is Bloodborne.
It is a challenging but incredibly rewarding game at the end of the day. And it's also one, I'll say, that kind of forced me to be a different kind of gamer than I'm used to being. And, you know, it also was kind of my Hail Mary when it came to FromSoftware, because I used to suck so bad at those games and I used to rage quit so often. And the game itself it grew on me. And it got to the point where, you know, it became one of my favorite games. If you were to ask me what my top 5 favorite games are now, Bloodborne would easily be in there.
Nice. How about you, DispOsedHero? What would you say? What is Bloodborne?
For me, what comes to mind is that it's an evolution of the Dark Souls formula. And I guess you have to be familiar with Dark Souls to understand that reference. But for me, Bloodborne it's very similar in a lot of ways, but it's more fast-paced, and a lot of the mechanics and aspects of the game are streamlined. And just kind of to echo what Ben said, it's very challenging, forces you to change the way you play action games, because you can't go into it with the same mindset you might have with a less challenging game.
Totally.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
How about you, DiskCart?
I'd say it's just on a style level, like a Lovecraftian, horror-centric, really dark world with interesting NPCs that are super spooky. When I first began this game, it was so spooky to me. But echoing what the other guys said, just how fast-paced it can be, just dodging around so quickly and avoiding attacks, just really changes the formula up from, say, like Dark Souls 3 or something like that. It's just a different type of Souls style game, and that's why we call them like Soulsborne games now, because it was so important that we had to tag it on to the Souls name because of just changing it up completely. But still, such an artfully done world that you fall in love with it really quickly, as long as you can maintain a hold on the controls and abilities.
Yeah, well said. I was kind of thinking about this, going through my head on how I would describe Bloodborne to maybe somebody who's never even heard of any of the FromSoftware games. And I think it's a challenging one because it's infamous for its difficulty. But at the same time, I think to some extent, FromSoftware's games difficulty is overstated, where a lot of it's the learning curve, like learning how to control the game, play the game, being a little bit more methodical. Like you can't just kind of go at it willy-nilly. And in many ways, it's truly like the 3D version of a Metroidvania. You know, you got certain routes that you can go until you unlock shortcuts or items that will allow access to different areas and so on, just like side-scrolling Metroidvania games.
I love that. I love hearing that from other people, that these games, you know, everyone says, you know, it's so hard, it's so difficult, these Souls games, I can't get into them because it's just a hard game, when really it's just it's a different mindset. It's a puzzle that you have to solve. Instead of going in there and thinking this is a really hard enemy, you have to think about their weakness and what weapons you're bringing to the table, and seeing the full range of attacks from an enemy is really important. You know, there's so much to these puzzles. It's just it's not just, it's difficult. You know, it could seem difficult if you go in there expecting it to be Bayonetta or Devil May Cry.
Mm-hmm.
But on its own, it's a puzzle game. And like, you know, your representation of it is really good as well. I love it when somebody puts it in their own way of thinking, because like I look at it like it's a puzzle game, and other people like looking at it like a Metroidvania or something like that. It's really interesting because it's all kind of the same thing. We all kind of look at these games in that same way, where it's not just, you know, an action game or something.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And the difficulty itself, I mean, I know that's kind of become the punchline for these types of games, but what I would say, it's hard, but it's not unfair, and it's never cheap. Because, you know, some games, they have the difficulty at such a high level, and your margin of error is so low. I find with these games, you have a good chance to get through whatever obstacle you're trying to overcome. It's just you have to adapt to the play style, and it's a game you're going to succeed if you play by certain rules. And that's kind of what I meant when I said it forced me to kind of adjust my play style, because I'm used to going in, you know, sword swinging, slashing everything in the room and being done with it. That's the quickest way to death in this game. You're not going to get far. You really got to kind of plan your strategy. You got to kind of have patience. I think if you're not a patient kind of gamer, that's when you would struggle with these kind of games. But if you take the time to learn it and to just kind of let the mysteries of the game envelop you, I think then you'll really be on the right path.
Yeah, I think that's very well stated.
I think anybody who hasn't played a Dark Souls game and is kind of intimidated by the reputation of these games, I think Bloodborne is the more accessible of all these types of games, because of its more fast-paced gameplay. And personally, I found it to be a little easier than Dark Souls, but that might just be me.
I did as well. And I think one of the big reasons too is that the number of weapons, and we'll get into that in a bit, just kind of with the weapons and all the different options, but it's a lot more streamlined than Dark Souls, because in Dark Souls you get hundreds of weapons. There's the weight of your equipment and armor and outfits, and it's a lot to unpack. I think with Bloodborne, it just gets you into the action quickly, and you're not so worried about the typical RPG tropes that you had to kind of focus on with the Dark Souls games. So yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's way more accessible, and I think the style will also appeal to some more than others.
Yeah, I mean, and lately with games like, you know, Fallen Order and Code Vein coming out, I think there's even a bigger window for access for more people from the outside to kind of get that taste for the Soulsborne style games. You know, like Code Vein, you can go in there and you can hit a lot more than you can in like a Bloodborne or a Dark Souls, but still it'll punish you after a while for doing that. And it's definitely a lot easier, I would say, than a Bloodborne or a Dark Souls. And then Fallen Order is even a little bit easier than those ones. It works you up to some harder fights down the line, where it's not as clean. Those games are not, you know, definitely not as clean or clear as FromSoft games or anything like that, or as just pristine in general. But they're really good entry points. We're getting to a point where people have access, I think.
Yeah, and it's created a whole new genre when you think about it too. Like, we call it a Souls-like now. I mean, there's games like Neo, there's games like The Surge, which I actually found way more difficult than Dark Souls or Bloodborne. But again, it's kind of birthed this whole new genre where just, you know, these kind of tropes, like the difficulty, the permadeath, or the potential for permadeath, that becomes part of the appeal, which I think is great. There's so many more options now.
Yeah, totally. It's definitely a blossoming genre at this point, and it'll be interesting to see if within a few years, if it gets like its own like defined name. I mean, Soulsborne is kind of where everybody's going with, but it'd be interesting to see if it gets its own genre name eventually.
Like Metroidvania.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people aren't a fan of that term, but
Yeah.
when
But
you
it
say
means
it,
what it means.
exactly, you know what's being talked about when somebody says Metroidvania.
Good. All signed and sealed. Now, let's begin the transfusion. Oh, don't you worry. Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere bad dream.
So I would be curious to what all of your experiences are with Bloodborne, if you've played it in the past, if you've played Dark Souls games or other Souls-like games. So kind of what's your background with Bloodborne going into this playthrough? We'll start with DispоsedHero.
Yeah, so I actually first tried to play Bloodborne a few years ago. I think it was back in 2015. And I wasn't really acclimated to this style of game at the time. I guess the more methodical pace. I'm not sure what it was, but I just couldn't get into it. So I kind of wrote off all the Souls-like games. It wasn't until a couple years ago that I played through Dark Souls and actually really got into it. And I knew after I played that and how much I enjoyed it, I would want to circle back around to Bloodborne at some point. So when it came up as a Cartridge Club game of the month, I knew I had to get in on it. So went into it with high expectations, and the game did not disappoint. I really enjoyed it this time, just immediately. I got all the things that turned me off about it before. I think Dark Souls really prepared me for it. Really enjoyed it this time.
Awesome. DiskCart, what's your experience?
Well, in general, with like Soulsborne games, my history starts off with buying Dark Souls 3 because I watched somebody playing it on YouTube or something, and I was stoked to try it. And almost within like 2.5 days, bringing it right back to GameStop and selling it and just being done with it forever. And then I watched there's some content creators called Easy Allies, and a guy called Bloodworth over there decided to do a full playthrough of Dark Souls 3. And as I watched Blood play Dark Souls 3, it completely clicked. Everything I needed to know, I finally understood. It's all about how you're going after these bosses and solving these puzzles and figuring out how you're going to progress, regardless of how you do it. You just want to get through this game. And so that's the mindset I had. I went back to that GameStop. I got the game for much cheaper. I saved some money. I mean, that's good. Got it home and began playing it. I got through that boss that I had been stuck at. That first boss was so hard for me before, but I beat it in like 3 or 4 tries the second time I tried it after purchasing it again, and was so amazed at how much I love this game. And then after that, it was all good. The rest of Dark Souls 3 was fantastic. I beat that game. And then almost immediately after beating that, I went and started playing Bloodborne. I have not completed Bloodborne. I have definitely watched the endings of Bloodborne and most of the end, but I've started playing it before at my house, and then I moved. I had to go to California for some family stuff, and so I just sat on my sister's PS4 playing it, and I played about 75% of the game at that time on my sister's PS4, and then I had to leave that state and come back here. And I've never really had the heart to get back into it and go completely all in again, because I had just done so much in that game that I was so proud of. Now I just play a little bit every time I go back to California and do that. But I definitely love Bloodborne. It's fantastic and beautiful. I'd say I like Dark Souls 3 a little bit more just because that style kind of appeals to me a little bit more. And then when it comes to Soulsborne games, I played Code Vein as well, and Fallen Order recently. There's even a couple other games out there that kind of fit that fold. But I really love the genre, and I love that dopamine that you get after defeating a boss and really being successful in being very tactical with those fights.
Excellent. Ben, I know you got quite the background with Bloodborne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my history with FromSoftware, it's very much kind of along the lines of what DiskCart just said. I got with the best of intentions, and I figured, okay, I'm gonna give this the old college try, do my best, and I just walked away from it each time. I think I love the style, I love the world, but I think I was a different kind of gamer at that time. I didn't really have the patience, and the game, it doesn't hold your hand. Like, the progression path is not always clear, so I found myself just getting stuck, getting frustrated. There'd be a boss that I get my ass handed to me every single time, and I just walked away from it. And then when Dark Souls 2 came out, again, gave it a try, best of intentions, it didn't gel. Flash forward to 2015, I was actually out of work for a period of time, and it was a bit of a difficult period, and my wife bought me a PS4 for Christmas, and one of the first games I got was Bloodborne, because at the time I was hosting a podcast with a friend, and he was all gushing about Bloodborne, and he said it's one of the best games you'll ever play, and I figured, okay, give it a shot. I got nothing but time. And very similar to my earlier experiences, I struggled, but then, that dopamine kind of kicks in. I took the time, I kind of planned my approach to the game and adjusted my approach accordingly. And then with each boss I'd defeat, I'd get more confident, I would get more sucked into the game, and then I found myself just becoming obsessed with it. When I wasn't playing the game, I'd be reading the wiki or watching videos. That's how I discovered Vati Vidya. He's kind of like the Lord Almighty of Souls games on YouTube.
Absolutely.
But, again, his walkthroughs are very helpful. His story videos kind of help flesh it all together. And I became like a huge fan of the game. And I think that was the point for me when it clicked, when I finally said, okay, these games, they're not the beast that I thought they were. It's just I need to have the patience and also the wherewithal just to kind of adjust my strategy. So what I did was I went back at the time, Dark Souls 3 was coming out. I played that and I beat it. Obviously not without difficulty, but I found myself enjoying it a lot more, taking the approach more seriously with the weapons and the different armor and, trying different classes just to see what worked. I also discovered the fun of co-op, which made things a lot easier. And one thing I would say to people who are hesitant to get into these games, consider the co-op as a way to kind of help you get over those difficult hurdles, because that's what helped me in Bloodborne. And then, I played through it several times, got the platinum trophy, and, I kind of have subsequently gone back to the original Dark Souls because there was a remaster released last year, and I loved it. Everything just suddenly clicked. The areas where I struggled, I suddenly was getting better at it, and I felt more compelled to keep going. And, I did watch a couple walkthrough videos. Fighting Cowboy did a full 100% walkthrough on YouTube, and I was just hooked. So I think I've become a firm fan of the series, and the games that I once hated have now become some of my favorites. And I'm not alone in that. I know other people who've also kind of had that Hail Mary moment where it just kind of clicks with them, and then the obsession begins. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, my backstory is pretty much just that. My first experience with any FromSoftware game was Dark Souls when they first ported it to the PC on Steam. And if anybody knows about the origins of Dark Souls on PC, it was very, very rough. Essentially, there was no controller support, and keyboard and mouse is dang near impossible for Dark Souls.
Oh my God.
Yep.
So I probably gave it like a solid hour just trying to get through the very beginning, like just a little area where you run through the sewers, kind of like jail, and I quit. I was like, I can't play this. So I gave it up completely. Then actually, it was around the time when I first started doing YouTube in 2015. A friend had just picked up Bloodborne and suggested that maybe we do like a little Let's Play or something so I could just get some content up on my channel. So I was like, yeah, sure. Bring it over. So he brought it over and we just played. There's like a few different video clips I did. I think they were like 10, 15 minutes each, basically of the character creation, going through the very beginning of Bloodborne, inside the clinic, dying to the werewolf and then going outside and getting murdered by the big dude with the axe. And I was like, okay, that was cool. Didn't really hook me at the time, so I never bothered picking up the game or revisiting it. And then just so many people, so many of my friends, as I was getting more and more involved with like the YouTube community, were just all about the FromSoftware games. And when Dark Souls 3 came out, I was like, okay, I'm going to check this out, see how things go. and I, sat down, gave it a solid go. Took me a while to figure out the gameplay because it, as you guys mentioned, it's there's an adjustment. Like you have to kind of play things a little bit differently than what you're used to in video games. And I ended up loving Dark Souls 3, and it's been consistent since then. So I played Dark Souls 3. 2 years ago, I played Bloodborne. Didn't do like platinum or anything, but just played the main story. And then I played Dark Souls Remaster. Now, if it's a FromSoftware game, I'm a day one person, and these games are like, they're like crack to me. Once I start playing them, like that's all I want to do. It just the dopamine that you get, the reward from overcoming the challenges is just like it's hard to explain, and there's not really many other games that give me that sort of feeling, the reward that I get unlocking the next shortcut or beating the next boss. So this was my second time playing Bloodborne. Yeah, I pretty much went all out this time, got the other endings, did some chalice dungeons and whatnot, and we'll kind of touch on some of that a little bit later.
If I could add one more thing.
Yeah.
So, one thing that's really cool about the FromSoftware games, at least in my experience, and like especially lately with Sekiro, is like by the end of those games, these are like the only games where I feel like I truly am the character by the end. Like I have complete control over everything my character does, and I'm just in the game at this point. In Sekiro, like the sword fights in there are so amazing, but you have to be just one with the controls and the character, and it just feels that's just something FromSoftware does so well. The controls are pristine. The hitboxes are great. I mean, there's some exceptions to those rules, but they did a really good job with their combat and everything. But it's just interesting that by the end of every game, I'm so invested in all of that stuff that I just like am that character.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue into talking about the gameplay. Like FromSoftware, these games wouldn't be as good as they were if it wasn't for just how refined and solid the gameplay is. Controls, how they structure everything, it's just spot on. Bloodborne kind of takes things a little bit differently than the Dark Souls games. A lot of shared aspects, but as you guys had mentioned, it's a little bit more fast-paced. Dark Souls was a little bit more methodical. You could rely on a shield. Rolling was like a make or break sometimes, depending on your character builds, where those elements are significantly less important in Bloodborne. The trade-off is, instead of things like shield or really relying on your roll, which you still need to roll in Bloodborne, parrying is a massive mechanic for this game, and it can make your life a lot easier, or it can make your life a lot more difficult, depending on how well you get the parry system down. I guess maybe we should explain what the parry system is. When you guys want to jump on that?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So the parry system is a combat mechanic where you basically have to deflect a hit. In Dark Souls, obviously, it's your shield. So you can, as soon as an enemy hit is about to strike you, you time it perfectly where you do a shield bash, and then it knocks the enemy back, and then it opens them for a stab. In Bloodborne, it's a little bit different because there aren't really any shields. I mean, there's one, but I think it was put in there as a joke. It's not really effective by any stretch of the imagination. But in Bloodborne, it's different because you have guns. Obviously, you have pistols, you have blunderbusses, you have a selection of Victorian, almost steampunkish kind of guns. And the thing is, you use those. They don't really do much damage, but what they do, they basically will knock the enemy back if they're about to hit you, and then you could do what can only be described as a visceral attack. So it's called a riposte, and that just rips their guts out and takes a huge amount of damage off, which, as you said, Church, it can make your life a lot easier if you pull it off, because, an enemy that might take 10 hits will now take only 2 if you get the timing right. The thing is, though, if you miss the timing, then you open yourself up to basically getting slaughtered. So it's one of the hard, it's an easy to understand but difficult to master mechanic. And it's been a constant through a lot of the Souls games. And again, I'm not very good at it, but I found with Bloodborne, I was better able to time the parrying window, and that made the combat a lot easier, especially with some bosses.
Yeah, well said. Personally, I struggled. The first time I played through Bloodborne, I could not get parrying down at all. I tried and I just learned how to play the game without doing that. With my second playthrough now, I felt a little bit more better equipped as I was experienced with the game. I played it on New Game Plus, so I was kind of beefed up. I had extra health, extra stamina, so I felt like I could kind of mess around a little bit more, especially early on in the game. And I found with most standard enemies, I was able to get parrying down pretty well, but I was never able to get it down with bosses. Like I would see people that would summon being able to parry bosses, but I never was able to do that. How about you, Disposed Hero? Did you get the parrying system down?
I think I did all right with it. It kind of depends on the individual enemy and their attack patterns. You really have to get a feel for their wind-ups and the timing of it. But yeah, it's a very, very cool risk versus reward system, and it's really satisfying when you get it right.
Yeah. Those visceral attacks are brutal. A lot of times your standard enemies, that's like a one-shot, unless they're the bigger guys, and usually then it's like a significant chunk. How about you, DiskCart?
Well, I think they're cool to watch because that's the only time I'm seeing them happen is when I'm watching somebody else play the game and they're able to hit that window perfectly. Man, I tried, but quickly I abandoned it and I was dodge rolling. Like that was pretty much my strategy for most of the game is just dodge rolling out of the way, getting behind people, hitting them and dodging attacks and doing that. But it seems like there's quite the advantage for parrying in the game. And then also it just looks really cool with all that blood spraying everywhere. And it's just awesome.
I never get tired of it.
Yeah, it's great. And
it's hard.
Great.
It's very hard.
Much like everything else in the game. Yeah, in rolling, I'm very thankful that you can still roll pretty effectively. I could be wrong about this, but it doesn't seem, or maybe I just didn't experiment enough. It doesn't seem like there's much like advantage or disadvantage with using the different armor. Like your roll's pretty consistent, where like Dark Souls, you would have the quick roll, and then people call it the fat roll, which is like a lot slower, very based around like people who get really technical talking about like iframes and all that stuff, which I never was able to really wrap my head around. But rolling was pretty much my go-to defense.
Bloodborne definitely has a lot of iframes. I can tell you that. Like for when you're like dodging out of the way, I definitely remember utilizing that quite a bit. It's just as a little no-hit period.
Yeah, some of the bosses, especially, like I remember in the Chalice dungeons, there were some pretty tough bosses, and the iframe saved me almost every time.
Yeah, for sure. If you could get that down, then you can pretty much avoid, most attacks. But you'd have to be perfect with it, of course.
Yeah, it's you got to kind of know what you're doing with the rolling, and you get the feel as you play the game. It's definitely something that improves. And for me, I initially just threw lots of points into stamina, so it would give me more rolls. So I would just roll and roll and roll until I finally got to a place where either I could attack or figure out what I was going to do next. So then we got our defense, our parries, and our rolling. I think Bloodborne has an interesting approach with weapons, where Dark Souls really from the get-go, all sorts of different weapons, different fighting styles. Bloodborne kind of approaches it a little bit differently, especially if you're just looking at the base game itself. A lot less weapons once you start getting into like the old Hunter's DLC, and then like further in the game, there's other weapons you can get with like the Hunter badges and whatnot. What did you guys think of the weapons? Like, did you have a certain go-to? Did you try different things? What are your thoughts on weapons?
I personally loved it, and actually that's one of the reasons why I think Bloodborne grew on me the way it did, because you get that one weapon and you have to learn it inside and out, because each weapon has a trick mode. There's different approaches you can take, and by the end of the game you feel very attached to that one weapon. It's not like Dark Souls where you're constantly cycling in and out when you find a weapon that has better stats or better abilities. And I also found too that, throughout my first playthrough, I was just going for the beefy boy approach with the Kirk hammer. Like that was my weapon of choice, just pound the crap out of whatever moved. I found through subsequent playthroughs, there was a lot of other great weapons. The whirligig saw, or as I call it, the pizza cutter that you got in the DLC, that became one of my absolute favorites. Cause again, it has serration on it, which is very effective against some bosses, but it's also learning those little things with your weapons, when to use them, how to use them. You really feel more connected to it. Nothing really feels like it's, superfluous or a throwaway. Everything kind of has a purpose, and it's fun to experiment because every weapon feels unique, and some of them are very inventive too. I mean, the blood letter, that thing is just gruesome, but I love it.
Yeah, it allows people to kind of pick their style in many ways. And yeah, I think it's worth homing in on the trick weapon part that you mentioned, that every weapon has basically like two different modes depending on the weapon. Like the hunter axe could be a one-handed axe, or you could do the trick mode, and then all of a sudden now you got a two-handed axe that has ridiculous range. The Kirk hammer was a sword that turns into a big hammer, and some of the weapons give you a lot of versatility with that.
Mm-hmm. And it's also how you use them in battle too, because sometimes if you adjust your weapon or put it into its second form when you're in the middle of a move, sometimes that can actually take off a lot of damage, and that becomes a very viable approach to certain bosses or certain tough enemies. So again, it's learning those little nuances that really gets you into the mood with your weapons.
It can feel really cool too, to be switching from like a long range weapon to a short range weapon and just like a swipe. It just feels really, really awesome. And I could be wrong, but I don't remember having any melee style weapon in a Dark Souls, or at least in Dark Souls 3, which is pretty much the only Dark Souls that I've played, that would like adapt like that. That would just click over and become something totally different. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. DispOsed, did you have what weapon did you stick through with most of the game, or did you try different weapons? What'd you go with?
Yeah, I mostly stuck to the same few weapons. I started with the saw cleaver and used that for probably half the game. I liked its. I tried the hunter's axe as well, but I preferred the saw cleaver's speed and lower stamina costs compared to the hunter's axe. But then once I was able to get the Ludwig Holy Blade, I stuck with that for most of the game.
That's a beast.
Yeah.
I also got the Holy Moonlight Sword from the DLC, and it's kind of similar to the Ludwig Blade, but it has its differences. But I kind of swap back and forth between those two for like the latter half of the game.
Awesome. DiskCart, did you say what weapon you used? Sorry,
Saw cleaver for sure. Once I get attached to like a weapon, I usually stick with it and invest in that. And then if other stuff comes, I'll give it a little tryout, but most of the time I stick with what I have. And I just liked switching between, extending that out or having it be more of a close range weapon.
Sure. It's kind of, I don't exactly remember what I did during my first playthrough. I know I went with the hunter's axe at first, and then eventually I stuck with the Kirk hammer for quite a while, since I didn't really have the parrying down. I was just trying to go for like heavy damage. And then eventually, once going into like the DLC and whatnot, I got the Ludwig's Holy Sword as well. And pretty much I stuck with that with the rest of my playthrough the first time, and almost the entirety, really the entirety of this playthrough. That's what I used the entire game. I love that weapon so much. If I need, the quickness, I can go to the one-handed mode, but sticking with that two-handed combo that you can pull off with kind of like the charge attack and then transition into the huge downward slam where you could just like floor the enemies. Super rewarding. I love that thing.
Do any of you guys use any of those arcane weapons?
There was a couple. The Chikage, I think, was one of them. Or was that Blood Tinge?
That was more Blood Tinge, yeah.
Blood Tinge.
I don't know if anybody went for like a heavy arcane build or not.
I didn't. I find generally in these games, I usually just stick with high armor, high damage. I've never had luck with using like magic or magic weapons, even in like the Dark Souls games, which I kind of feel like I'm missing out in some regard, because when I summon people, or like sometimes like maybe invade or I get invaded, like seeing some people with like the magic builds, like they can crush some stuff.
Oh yeah, it's those people with the dark magic in Dark Souls 1. They would just kick my butt every time.
Yeah, for sure. I did try to experiment a little bit with my second playthrough. Every once in a while, just for funsies, I'd switch off with the Burial Blade, which is the weapon that you get after beating the end boss the first time. Then you can buy it at the shop and whatnot. And then I also tried the Whirligig a little bit, as I heard a lot of people were saying that it's kind of like great for large enemies. You can just like melt through them by, I think, just using the kind of you hold the R2 and it just like grinds, but I didn't really have much success with that. So I didn't use it much. I tried it, but I felt like I was just doing something wrong.
Yeah, it's situational. I mean, I remember when I was in the Chalice dungeons, there was the amygdala in the cursed one, which your health is at half, and one shot's going to kill you. That grind feature actually was very effective on that, but in other cases, it's not. So I guess it really depends on who you're fighting and kind of what your situation is.
Sure. And I do think it's pretty interesting that they really, especially your first playthrough, they really kind of limit your weapons for quite a while, unless you like I said, start getting the hunter badges with kind of like some of the side quests, or going into the old Hunters DLC, when all of a sudden now there's tons of weapons. I think it's an interesting approach. And what are you guys' thoughts on armor? I kind of got the impression that it was kind of arbitrary. The armors didn't really help too much with anything besides maybe resistances.
It's definitely not something I really ever thought about. So I don't think it never made or break me. That's for sure. Not like in Dark Souls where I was just always looking for, the best possible thing I could get without doing fat rolls everywhere.
Yeah, there's no encumbrance system, so really it doesn't make a difference. And you're right, the resistances are really where the differences shine, but even then, that's situational. I mean, if you're fighting a fire boss, like Lawrence in the DLC, I mean, some higher fire resistance would be beneficial, but, it's not always. I found myself, I'd only change up my armor when I wanted new fashion. Like, it wasn't really a consideration. Definitely not to the extent it was in Dark Souls.
Yeah, people refer to it as Fashion Souls, which I think Dark Souls 3 really kind of made that a thing, and I kind of felt that true with this one. Eventually I just kind of went with what I thought looked cool rather than what was functional. Was there like a certain armor set that you stuck with, or did you just kind of switch it off as you played through? Disposed Hero, what did you do with armor? Anything particular?
I think for most of the game, I probably used I think it might have been the old Hunter's garb or something. It's something you find very early. I use that for most of the game. And then I think in Canehurst, you find like Executioner's.
Yes.
And I used that. I just thought that looked cool. And I thought the stats were pretty good, even though, like you guys said, there's not really like any specific armor that's like really great. They're all kind of the same, except with some minor differences. Some have better fire resistance and whatnot. But yeah, I use that Executioner's garb, and I just thought it looked cool.
Yeah, I used Executioner's garb. I think I had the Executioner's garb for the armor, and then like I forget exactly what the name is. It's like the white church set. I used the skirt and the hood. So it's just kind of like this bulky, like holy looking person just going around crushing everything with my massive two-handed sword.
That's a good look for sure. Yeah. for me, I picked the Bone Ash armor. I think I got that in the Chalice dungeons. That was really good. And then also the Graveguard set, which you find in the forest. That's a good set as well. Again, they just look cool. I don't really think it gave me an advantage, but again, the fashion element, I mean, you got to switch it up once in a while.
Yeah. How about you, DiskCart? Any particular armors you went with?
Like the hunter stuff that you get really early on. I can't remember exactly what the name of it was, but as I find stuff, I just put it on. So, I'm just constantly changing. And when it comes to fashion, I didn't really care so much. It was more like I found a thing, and then you put it on and you're good to go. But
sure.
Didn't really think about it too much outside of that.
Yeah, the only other switch up I did is I put on the noble dress whenever I did co-op.
Okay, sure.
You got to look your best, right?
Yeah, right.
I will say that if I was fighting a boss that I was having trouble with and it did a lot of like arcane attacks, I would maybe try to use armor that had higher arcane resistance or something like that. But that's pretty much the only type of specking I tried to do with armor.
Yeah, there was a couple times. I can't remember exactly now, but I know there was a couple times where I got hung up and I was like, I need to do something to try to like help me a little bit. Actually, I think it was the first time I re-encountered the winter lanterns again, which I hate those things so much. Dang winter lanterns. Those are the I don't even really know how to describe them. It's like a woman and they have the big like eyeball brain looking head and they sing. And as soon as they see you, they start building the frenzy status ailment, which once the frenzy builds up, then it does 80% damage. And generally you're screwed unless you kill them immediately.
Oh, bane of my existence.
Yeah. I hate those things so much. But I guess since you mentioned the co-op aspect, I think that's something definitely worth talking about. Is I hear and I see oftentimes a lot of people aren't really taking advantage of the co-op system. And again, the game doesn't do a great job of like really like explaining or encouraging. Like they do the initial introduction. Like I forget what point in the game where they give you the beckoning bell and the small resonant bell and the sinister resonant bell. But much like the Dark Souls games, at pretty much any point during the level until you beat the boss, you can ring this bell. And if there's other people that have rang their like helper bell, they can be summoned into your game, help you through the levels, help you with bosses. And I think it really helps a lot for me anyways. Like I always, as much as I could, I always summoned. Did you guys make use of that? Did you summon people?
Oh yeah, you bet. You bet. I mean, I'd get to some bosses and after doing, 10, 15 tries on one or something, I'd get somebody in there and give it a try and hope that, I end up with a good person. Sometimes I would just ring it randomly in places and see if I would get lucky and get somebody to join my game. I had a friend who, when I was doing this new playthrough, he joined into my game and we ran around. It's amazing how well it works. Like I never had any issues with it, and it's just fun to run around that world with another human being. It definitely is different than if you're playing it by yourself. It feels different. But it's still really good. And like people were saying earlier, it makes it accessible for people who, are afraid of, getting their butt kicked all the time. It can help to have that other body in there.
Yeah, it definitely mitigates the difficulty. And I find, there's that cabal of fans out there who are like, you shouldn't summon. You need to get good, as they say. I disagree. I think, that's what really helped me kind of get the grips with the game, because I got the beckoning bell just before Father Gascoigne. And that usually for a lot of players, that's kind of the make it or break it, because he's the first really tough boss. He could be the first one you encounter, or it could be the cleric beast, one of the two. But I remember I was struggling with that, and then I realized, okay, I have this beckoning bell. I rang it, and two people came in and just helped me, lay waste to the father. So, it definitely kind of opened my eyes to the fact that co-op can be a good thing, and it's a lot better implemented than Dark Souls, where you have to look on the ground for summon signs. You're just ringing a bell. If someone's in that general area and they've also rang the small resonant bell, it will connect you, provided there's certain matchmaking requirements that you meet. But one other thing I'll mention too is that co-op was really good for practicing. I would go into other people's games just to practice on a boss I was struggling with, just to see, okay, what am I missing in my playthrough? Because there's really no consequence if you die in co-op. You don't lose any blood echoes. You don't lose any progress. You just go back to where you were. So I use that a lot for practicing. And then later on, as I got better, sometimes I wouldn't even just play the game. I would just ring the bell and let people summon me in and help them with bosses.
Also a good opportunity to be using the emotes and stuff,
Yes.
You could do them on your own, but they're just way less fun.
Got to give the bow, right?
Yeah. You got to have etiquette. Somebody joins your game, you got to give a bow or some sort of gesture. DisposedHero, did you take advantage of the co-op system?
No, I actually didn't summon anybody into my game. I took every opportunity I could to summon an NPC in for some of the difficult boss fights, and their help was invaluable a lot of times, just for holding some of the aggro and taking some of the heat off of you. But I never actually summoned any other players in.
And I believe, and I might be mistaken, but I think isn't the all the NPCs, aren't they part of the old Hunters DLC?
Some of them are, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Some are. I don't think they all are because I don't
Okay.
think I had the DLC, and I definitely had NPCs.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Like I know you can summon Alfred in one fight, and you see him in the main core game.
Mhm.
Yes.
And you can summon Father Gascoigne in the beginning before you fight him, obviously. And
Yes.
he can also you can use him in the cleric beast fight.
Yeah, so it's a pretty neat system. I think the biggest drag about it is that you have to have PS Plus for the online functionality to be able to summon other players. But yeah, fortunately, there are various instances throughout the game where you can summon NPCs. I have no qualms about it. It's a tough game. I understand that. I'm proud of the achievements that I'm able to make in the FromSoftware games, but personally, I find it a lot more enjoyable when I'm playing with other people, even if like the communication is limited to emotes or just spinning around in circles, whatnot. I every chance I got, as soon as I got in an area, I'd ring my bell. Maybe people would join, maybe they wouldn't. I found early in the game, it was really easy to get people to join you during the levels, and not so much like in the mid game or especially in the side off areas like the Nightmare Frontier or the upper Cathedral Ward. Like I couldn't get anybody in the levels, but almost always with boss fights, although again there are certain boss fights, especially the side off bosses, like I was like, oh okay, I'm just gonna have to bite the bullet and do this myself. And it's kind of neat with the summoning system too. There's a risk reward with that, just like in the Dark Souls games, where if you ring a bell, you can be invaded by a hostile player. Did you guys experience much with that? Hostile players coming into your games?
Yep, definitely had hostile players come in. Don't like that. Nope.
It's always the worst time, right?
Yep. It's like, oh, well, now I'm going to think a little bit before I start using these bells, you know?
Yeah, I got evaded a couple times, but it wasn't very frequent. The reason being is that I always hunt down the Bell Maiden and kill her, so that would silence the Sinister Bell. Because again, nothing's worse than having someone overpowered come into your game and just slaughter you, especially when it takes you a long time to get someone like a co-op partner to come in. Yeah. Some areas it takes longer than others. But I found the invasions were nowhere near as bad as Dark Souls.
Yeah, Dark Souls is a lot more frequent.
I got ganked so many times in Dark Souls. I think
Yes.
Yeah, I think maybe a couple of times I got invaded in Bloodborne, and it was fairly manageable. There are some areas that are known as hotspots because they have a Bell Maiden there who will summon in hostile invaders. There's 2 areas where that's just there by default. All the other times it's going to happen when you ring the bell and you get a co-op partner. So, like you said, it's a risk versus reward, but typically I'm right outside the boss room, so I just send them packing if someone invades.
I'm not like bragging by any means, but even with the Dark Souls games and Bloodborne, I find like at a certain point, usually like maybe less than halfway through the game, like once I finally like I'm in the zone, like I can control my character well, I got, you know, my weapon figured out. I just get to a point where unless somebody is like ridiculously overpowered, some weird gank build, like I could just crush people, especially with the Ludwig's Holy Sword. Like that thing would just stun people and I would dominate and then take them out, and you can do your little like emote taunt, you know, point, get out of here.
Or just
More
dust your
opportunities.
dust your hands off and be done with them. Yeah.
And what I found interesting with that is this time, the first time I played through Bloodborne, I didn't bother with the Chalice dungeons at all. I didn't really think there was much importance to them. And there's not a ton of importance with the Chalice dungeons to the main story. In some regards, there actually is if you're into the item descriptions and like some of the deeper lore that you really have to like look forward to. But this time I decided to run through the Chalice dungeons because I was trying to get the platinum achievement, and it requires a couple very specific things. And I was very surprised with those, as I was able to like summon like 2 people almost constantly, like with minimal wait time. So I really feel like a lot of people, once they play the game, they just kind of like continuously grind the Chalice dungeons, I guess. And the Chalice dungeons aren't restricted to level at all. So they're just they are what they are, and anybody can join basically.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy the Chalice dungeons?
I did. Once I kind of had, I guess, like a mission, sort of say, like I was really determined to get through them. Like there's a couple weapons you have to get, and then like there's a sort of like an end boss. I had a lot of fun running through them, especially with the fact that I was getting multiple people joining, like pretty much every Chalice dungeon I was doing. I did enjoy them. I don't foresee myself grinding through the games. That's mostly just how I play games. Usually I play a game to completion and then I move on to the next game. I don't like stick with them too much.
Yeah, they were good for what they are. I mean, I found them to be a bit of a grind, especially as you get to the deeper depths, because you got to farm for resources, you got to get all the Chalice ritual items. But the big benefit of the Chalice dungeons, we didn't really touch upon it with the weapons, but you can infuse them with blood gems to make them stronger. So you can have any number of gems. Each weapon has slots that you can put gems into to make them stronger, to give them attributes. The best ones are found in the Chalice dungeons. So I think anyone who's looking to really beef up their weapons, that's where you want to be.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess it's worth explaining what the Chalice dungeons are. I'm not great at describing these. They're basically essentially like bonus dungeons you can do that you have to get a couple materials and you can craft like essentially like a level 1 dungeon, and then you go through that. There's a couple boss fights per level, and then once you beat that, you get another Chalice, which you can make like a second level dungeon, and so on and so forth. Eventually, you can get to there is kind of like an end, but then it's basically you can just kind of like repeat them and grind, and you can make ones that have like restrictions like half health, or I think there was some other aspects to them. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything on those.
No, you got it right. And the thing is, too, is that each type of dungeon, like the cursed ones, or I think there was the abyssal ones as well, they give you different types of gems. So there is a benefit to kind of going through each one. But the cursed one, that's probably the biggest barrier to the platinum trophy, because you're at half health. And honestly, there are some enemies, especially the amygdala boss, they'll one-shot you.
I struggled with that one. Did you guys play through the Chalice dungeons this time at all?
Definitely didn't play all the way through. I do like having them there. Like if I get to a boss and I'm really struggling, just having like another place to go explore is really cool. Like I'll take a breather from doing whatever it is I'm doing, and then just go a totally different direction and explore for a while, and gather some resources and stuff. And I liked having those there to do that kind of thing. Just something different, something to freshen things up.
Sure. DispOsedHero, did you, if I remember, did you go for platinum this time?
I did. I actually unlocked the platinum yesterday.
Nice.
So,
well done.
I wasn't going to do the Chalice dungeons. I think I did the first one just to see what it was, and then I looked through the trophy list, and I didn't see anything explicitly saying trophies for Chalice dungeon, so I didn't think you had to do all that. So, it was later that I found out that one of the boss trophies is a boss that you fight, and after you go through like 7 Chalice dungeons. So I was stubborn and decided I had to do it. So I did it. And that was easily the most difficulty I had with the game. Like some of those bosses, like especially in the Defiled, and I think like the what is it, like the Is Palace or something, where you have to fight like Eurydice again or something. I had a lot of trouble with some of those bosses, like far more than any other bosses in the game. And I didn't really dislike doing the chalices, but it's I think it's by far the weakest content in the game. I think it's cool that they're there. I think it's really more for like players who finish all the main content and then just want more, which is fine. But it was the biggest grind for getting the platinum.
Yeah,
for sure.
I definitely agree.
I will say it was pretty interesting, and I was very surprised on how much unique content was in the Chalice dungeons. Like the areas themselves are like entirely unique to the Chalice dungeons. Tons of enemies. Like they put a lot of work into this dungeon system, which I thought was pretty neat.
Yeah, there were some cool enemies that I don't remember seeing in the main game.
There's some unique ones for sure. I just remember the troll that rolls towards you naked. That one just tripped you up every time.
Yeah, that thing sucked. So how about the Old Hunters DLC? Did you guys play through that this time, or have you played through it before? Well, I mean, if you got the no, you don't need that for the platinum. Actually, that has its own achievements. Did you guys play through the Old Hunters DLC?
I have not.
Played through about half of it. I'm at the Living Failures boss fight. I think it's just I got burnt out on the game, so I decided to put it down. But my goal is to eventually go back and finish the Old Hunters. I don't know. I'm just looking ahead to that Orphan of Cause fight, just with severe dread.
Yeah, I did the DLC. I will say I heard a lot of scary things about that Orphan of Cause fight. Got him on the first try.
Oh wow, nice.
So I think if you can get through a lot of those chalice fights, you shouldn't have too much trouble with that one.
Yeah. I didn't play through the Old Hunters DLC this time, but I did play it through it the first time I played through the game, and I found it to be extremely more challenging than the base game itself. Like I really, really struggled to get through it. But the Orphan of Chaos, I think it was the third try I did, but again, I was summoning people the entire time.
That fishing hamlet area, I had a
yes, that is the absolute worst. There was a weapon that is in the fishing hamlet, which is one of the last areas in the Old Hunters DLC. It's you go down this well, and there's these two giant, I think they're called sharks, even though they're like big humanoid-looking fish creatures, and you have to kill two of them. And I could not kill two of them. I could take out one, and the other one would just destroy me.
Yeah, it's tough. It took me a few tries.
That's the Rakuyo. That's the weapon you get, and that's the one Lady Maria was using in the clock tower.
Yeah, and I was like, I want two swords. That'd be sweet. Nope, couldn't do it.
I had a lot more trouble with that Lady Maria fight than I did with the Orphan of Cause.
Yes, same. She was tough. But for me, I think my biggest struggles in the Old Hunters DLC was the hunters themselves. Like for people listening who might not know, like even in the base game, just randomly throughout certain areas, there's going to be other hunters like you that will just, come running up on you. They're super aggressive, and they're all over the place in the Old Hunters DLC, and they're pretty tough.
Yeah, and they come at you fast too. So and that is the first part of the DLC that you see. So you realize, okay, you're in for a tough ride. But they're very easy to parry, and that's where parrying comes into play. As long as you can get that timing down, that area becomes a little bit easier. But it's still, I like yourself, I struggled just because it seems like they ramped up the number of enemies in a given area, and also the corridors are tighter, so you have less margin of error.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so we kind of briefly touched on it before, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about the general design of the game when it comes to like the general aesthetics and the level layouts, especially the level layouts, which is, I think, what really makes FromSoftware games shine besides the tight gameplay is their masterful level design. What do you guys think about the general design of this game?
It's really good. It is really good. I really like the layout of everything. Getting like your, I forget what you call them, but like the secret doors that bring you back so that you can have an easier route to wherever you're going.
Shortcuts.
Your shortcuts are good. I don't know. I feel like moving around was really good. I can't remember having a really long backtrack. I'm sure there was one at the very least, but most of the time everything seemed to be in a good spot. Whereas in like Dark Souls 3, I definitely remember having certain places where I had to like backtrack for long distances and really did not like certain parts of that. But this is pretty good layout. And I mean, overall, like just the art design is really creepy and awesome. Like we said earlier, and having like, people in windows talking to you and just really creepy stuff everywhere is awesome.
Yeah, it feels like a world that's like on the brink of decay, and I love that kind of aesthetic. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get Bloodborne, was because I love the whole Gothic, Victorian, Lovecraftian kind of aesthetic that the game has. But the level design was probably where I had my first, wow, this is cool moment, because I was in the forest and then I found this elevator and I'm like, okay, where does this go? And then it takes me right back to the first lantern. So I'm like, you really get a feel for the verticality of these levels. And I think that was also one of the strengths in Dark Souls, because everything feels interconnected. It's less so in Bloodborne, because you're kind of going in and out of the Hunter's Dream and you're kind of warping to different areas, but a lot of it is interconnected. And oftentimes if you see a lantern, that's the only one. You have to find a shortcut so you can make a run back to the boss, or just to run through the area quicker. So yeah, you're very right. I mean, there was less backtracking and less kind of wandering around, wondering where you are. I mean, everything had a purpose, and just the design, it was so cohesive and just so well implemented. And, I never felt that the design of the game or the levels was unfair, or, I was like a babe in the woods. I didn't know where I was going. I never had that feeling.
Yeah, it is always a great feeling. Like, you're going through this level, sometimes it might take you a half an hour, sometimes an hour, and you're like, you're almost out of blood vials. You're limping along, and then you'll come across an elevator, and you'll be like, all right, I'm gonna take this elevator, see where it goes, and then it brings you right to your lantern, and all of a sudden, if you die, you can basically get exactly back to where you were with
so good. That's got to be the second level of like dopamine you can get from the game, right?
Yeah.
Like you have the bosses, you beat a boss, it's probably the highest you can possibly get, and then number 2 is just opening that door.
For sure. What are your thoughts, Disposed Hero?
Yeah, I pretty much just agree with what you guys said. It's really enjoyed the overall layouts of the areas, the branching paths. There's a lot to explore. Opening up the shortcuts is always very satisfying. I do feel like a lot of the environments or the world itself is a little bit more linear than in Dark Souls, whereas I think in Dark Souls there's more interconnectivity between individual areas. I kind of prefer that about Dark Souls. I think it's the only thing I prefer about Dark Souls to Bloodborne is that the world feels a little more cohesive.
Mm-hmm.
But I really don't have any complaints about Bloodborne. That being said, I mean, I think everything was really well done.
Yeah, and I think aesthetically the biggest separating factor from previous FromSoftware games is that like Lovecrafty and kind of the celestial horror elements. Everything's very bizarre looking. I think it was a pretty wild moment in the game when all of a sudden you're just going about your business, you beat a boss, you return to an area, and there's this massive creature just like stuck to the side of a building. And it's like, what the heck? I love that element. It's pretty wild stuff, and it ties in great with the story, which I think is the next part I would like to touch on, is kind of how you guys felt about the story or the presentation of the story, or maybe even the lack of story, because it really depends on how much you delve into the game, because it's very superficial. They don't really give you a lot to go on. You do encounter characters who will say things, but really to get the very details of the story, like what happened, what's going on, who is this person, why are they here, like really is involved in reading item descriptions, which generally I don't do myself.
Mm-hmm.
What are your guys' thoughts on the story, like the first time you played through, before you maybe did further research, like checking out Avadi videos, which I would like to touch on, but what were your kind of like initial impressions of kind of the story? And
Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Oh, I know. You think now to betray me.
No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the old blood. I must take my leave.
I'll get this out of the way. When I played this game, I don't think I ever for like a second. I mean, I have like the curiosity. This game is clearly just sinks curiosity into you as to what is going on, because it's so weird, such a weird game. But I don't want to sit there and look at my items descriptions It's just not what I want to do. I want to get to a boss or an enemy that is new and learn how to fight them.
Mhm.
And that's pretty much, the core of why I play these games. And so like videos like you're talking from Vadi, I just don't seek it out. I don't have interest in it because the dopamine that I get from these games is all wrapped up in that gameplay.
Mhm.
The first time I've really experienced story in a FromSoftware game was Sekiro. And that's like the first time it was really fed to me.
Yeah.
But that's only because it's part of what you have to see. But really all about gameplay for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people. I played through most of the From Software games, yet I would struggle to tell someone what they're about. Because again, like the story, there's really no narrative to these games. There's really no kind of story that's propelling you forward. It's all in the item descriptions. It's through NPC dialogue, and if you're not really kind of immersing in it, you're going to miss a lot. My first playthrough, I'll be honest, I hadn't a bloody clue what the story was about, but I got curious afterwards. So that's when I started watching Vadi. I started watching other channels, and then suddenly things started to make sense. That NPC had a purpose. This boss has a backstory. Father Gascoigne, who I struggled with, he apparently was integral to the Healing Church. He was out every night slaughtering beasts, and there's a very sad backstory to that with his family. So you do kind of find these things over time, but it's not given to you. In terms of expository dialogue, it's just something you have to seek out, and you really have to read into everything, which, I'm kind of like DiskCart. Like for me, it's all about the gameplay, and it's all about kind of chasing that next high, beating that boss, getting over that difficult area. The story for me kind of became a secondary thing that I explored in subsequent playthroughs. I didn't really delve too much into it in the beginning. And even now, I've seen the videos, I've read the wiki, I still probably couldn't make heads or tails of half the story.
Sure. How about you, Disposed Hero?
Yeah, the story presentation of these games is something I've always been kind of conflicted on, because I really like that these games aren't bogged down with exposition and story and cutscenes and dialogue and all of that. But at the same time, I still think it would be nice if just to know what's going on. I was playing this game and doing research on the story as I was playing through it, and I kind of have it pieced together, but I still am unclear on a lot of things. I used to think that From Software was just kind of lazy with their stories, but I mean the story's there. I mean they've crafted a pretty detailed story and characters and all this lore and everything to go along with it. But it's just, you really have to do your homework if you want to figure that stuff out. It's a rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah. It's what I think is great about the games is that you can play through these games. You don't really need to know what happened, what's going on. You keep moving through, and the strength of the game is entirely in its gameplay. For me, I love story in games. Like I would say when it comes to games, I prefer a great story over great gameplay, which is kind of backwards for a lot of gamers, where I will give games that have weak gameplay passes if they have great stories. But these games do have great stories. It's just, unless you're like almost a researcher, it's really hard to pick up all the pieces, especially with From Software games where, I mean, if you want all the details, you need like all the items, you have to read all the item descriptions, and then you have to like connect the dots.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's and we keep mentioning Vadi Vidya, and that's why I am so thankful for him, because one, he connects all the dots. He has an amazing presentation, like his voice, so soothing.
Pure ASMR.
Absolutely. But once you have somebody who can like really kind of lay it all out for you, the story is, I think it's absolutely fascinating. I don't know if I should do like a little spoiler thing, but I mean, ultimately, I guess it doesn't really matter because you can play the game without any of the story. But I once all those pieces are there, it's not necessarily like the story in the moment. It's all backstory. It's all what happened, and now you're just there in the aftermath of all the events. Because like ultimately, like everything kind of started in the Chalice dungeons. Like lore wise, it was like the I forget the group, not the, was it the Healing Church? Were they like the first
They were the church, and then there was also the Bergenworth Scholars.
Yes, the Bergenworth
they were part of
Scholars.
it.
Yeah. So it was like it started with them discovering these ancient tombs, the Chalice dungeons, and they discover the old blood, which is essentially like blood of the gods, the Lovecraftian creatures. And then once they started experimenting with that, like, you know, is this magical cure all thing, and people are coming from all across the world to partake in this blood, and little did they know, like, eventually it started turning people into beasts, and then there was like fractures in the scholars, and they broke off into the healing church, and then eventually came the hunters. And I mean, the story is fascinating for anybody who wants to really like delve into that. Watch Vadi Vidya, his videos. Like they're just the fact that as you said, that it's like ASMR like gold. Like he's just a pleasure to listen to, and like the stories are. It's fascinating stuff. Really, really cool stuff. Did you guys have any other thoughts on any of that? I guess the game itself, the gameplay, the story, design. Any final thoughts in those areas?
I think what I love about it, and this is very typical of FromSoftware, it's the little details that you notice after you play the game a couple of times. Like even in the scenery, like you're going through Bergenworth and there's jars full of eyeballs, there's all this stuff in the background. Like, for me, it's fascinating. And I love they put so much effort into the small details, and sometimes it could have a very big impact. The name of an item could be related to a point in the story. Like to get to the DLC, you need Eye of a Blood Drunk Hunter. And that kind of goes back to the hunters getting drunk off the old blood and turning into beasts themselves. So there is definitely some connectivity there that you miss on your first playthrough, and then you kind of absorb over time. I just love the little details in the game, and that's why, every time I play through it, I feel like I get something different out of it.
I will say I really love like hearing that, and even in like most recently, even in Sekiro and stuff, like those little details that you think are just set dressing. And then like coming back and then finding out that they are actually something, and that they're not just somebody threw it on there to make it look cool. I really do love that detail.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about FromSoftware is that many games I've played over the past 20, 30 years I've been gaming, most of them are forgettable. I've beaten them, I'm done with them, I'm never going back. I always remember my FromSoftware experiences, and I think Bloodborne stands out the most because I played through it probably 7 times. So, it's one of those ones that just resonates at a higher level. So, yeah, I think FromSoftware made a great game, and we definitely need a sequel.
Yes. Any other thoughts, DispOsed Hero?
No, I think you guys pretty much touched on everything that I would touch on.
All right. I think the only thing it's kind of one of the least talked about aspects of any FromSoftware games is the music. The games have pretty great soundtracks, but it's kind of hard to like the soundtracks are pretty much non-existent during the levels. It's like the boss fights and like some of the story scenes, they serve as more just kind of background, but for some reason, I am slipping the name of the composer.
Wikipedia.
Yeah. Whoops. Because it's not the same. Is it the same composer for Dark Souls?
Chris Velasco and Michael Wandmacher.
Yeah. And a couple Japanese composers as well.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the music? Was it stand out to you, or is it more just kind of a background thing or a mood setter? Is this a game that somewhere down the road you're like, I'm gonna listen to some Bloodborne soundtrack?
It was very orchestral, and that's one thing I found over and above Dark Souls. I found like especially if you go into a boss arena like the Bloodstar Beast, for example, and you hear the strings just suddenly go like, it really pumps you up. I find the music in Bloodborne, I think, is actually one of the best of any FromSoftware game. Again, it just feels more epic, more orchestral, and the tunes stand out better in my mind because I heard them so often because I kept dying so much to many of these bosses. But the music is a real grower, and I think it's definitely some of the best I've heard in a FromSoftware game.
Yeah. So I think as we're kind of wrapping things up here, I think we've mostly got final thoughts. Just want to check with you guys again. Any other things worth mentioning regarding Bloodborne in any aspect before we move on?
I think we covered everything pretty well. I would just kind of nail down again to anybody who's thinking about jumping into a Soulsborne type game that this is definitely accessible. This is definitely an accessible game. Like people were saying earlier, like Ben was saying earlier, you can always co-op. You can jump in with somebody from Cartridge Club and have a good time and really get into this game and figure it out. But it's definitely accessible.
So I think then let's look at some community impressions where if anybody plays along with Prime, you can use the hashtag play along with Prime, or a lot of times towards the end of the month, there will be generally a tweet encouraging you to share your thoughts on the game of the month. And a lot of times we'll cover those on the podcast. So we got a few community impressions that I would like to share. So first one we got here is from @It'sRocketSauce. He says, the game makes me hate it, then love it. It's so deflating to lose your blood echoes, but it's so rewarding to take down a boss that's been giving you trouble. I love the horror atmosphere that's in this game, but what's with the aliens? Overall, it's a great PS4 exclusive.
Well said. Very well.
Yeah, and that's one of the I don't want to say it's a weakness of the lack of story, but the lack of explanation. Because it's these like Cthulhu like creatures. It's like, what's the deal with those? They're pretty wild.
Yeah, it's never really explained explicitly. So you're kind of going through the game, and then suddenly you get these little bubblehead creatures coming at you, and you're like, what the hell is that? I was certainly like that on my first playthrough, but I guess once you absorb the story, you kind of realize there is a connection, to the great ones, as they're called.
Yes. Then we got a comment from Musty Hobbit. He says, going into this game, I was scared of even the concept of a Souls game. But once I made some progress and began to learn the flow of combat, suddenly the whole game opened up for me, and I was astonished at how much I just wanted to be in it. It was all I was playing for almost the entire month. The setting is perfect, fierce, grotesque at times, and menacing. The mechanics, which I'm sure I still have much to learn, are extremely rewarding and incentivize incremental improvement. It's also not often that a game motivates me to begin a new game plus, and I am strongly leaning towards attempting to get the platinum trophy for this one. It was an absolute blast, and I am a bit less intimidated to attempt other games in the genre now.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly well said, and I very much agree. Especially with my second playthrough, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go for that platinum, and I did, and I got the platinum as well.
It's a great feeling.
Yes, especially with FromSoftware games. And then the last community impression we got was from XBandyX, and he says, I wish that it was available on the Xbox so I could have played it.
Oh, yeah, no. I had an Xbox One first, so I definitely felt that pain as well.
Yeah, console exclusivity is always kind of a drag, but it's the nature of the beast. Of course, I wish games were available and accessible for everybody, but it is what it is. Mm-hmm. So I guess as we're kind of closing things out, I would like you guys to give an opportunity to let people know how they can get a hold of you on social media or any other place that you are available online. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's start with Ben. You want to let people know how they can get a hold of you?
Sure, yeah. The only way to currently find me online, there's other places, but at BRowland1 on Twitter. That's BROWLAND with the numeral 1 at the end. And yeah, if you enjoy memes and game talk and just randomness, hit me up.
Perfect. DiskCart.
So you can find me at youtube.com/DiskCart. I make videos on displaying games and game collections, amongst a few other things on there, and also been doing a little bit of streaming on twitch.tv/disc_cart. And those are pretty much the places you can track me down. I use Twitter a little bit, but not the effective place to get a hold of me.
Excellent. And Disposed Hero?
Yeah, I'm just on Twitter at TheDisposedHero. I mainly just talk about games I'm playing on there and a little bit of guitar stuff, just touching on my hobbies.
Perfect. And then if anybody wants to get a hold of me, I am available on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can look up The Game Grinder, and you will surely find me there. So before I kind of go through the closing little spiel here, I just want to thank you guys very much for taking the time out of your schedule and joining me for this episode of CC Prime. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
It was a great time. Thanks, guys.
So that is going to do it for this episode of Cartridge Club Prime for February 2020. The CC Prime game for March is Ori and the Blind Forest, which is available for Xbox One, Windows, and the Nintendo Switch. Then there's also the Cartridge Club Portable that is playing LCD games for March Madness, and LCD games being things like Tiger handhelds and so on and so forth. Basically, if it's an LCD game, it's fair game for Cartridge Club Portable. And then last but not least is the PC-focused Quick Save Club, who will be covering the classic PC game, Duke Nukem 3D. Then to those who are interested in supporting the club beyond a review on the podcast app of your choice, I'd like to mention that the club is entirely funded by pledges made from members of our community. We are extremely grateful to those supporters, and if you're interested in becoming one of them, please look into how you can do that at patreon.com/Cartridge Club. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you very much for listening, and CC Unite.
Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world. Oh, good hunter.